The Legend of Wish Sheppard, Denton, Maryland, Caroline County. Aloysius Wish Sheppard lived in Federalsburg, Maryland with his mother, and at the age of 19 was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to death in the 1915 rape of Mildred Clark. He confessed at first, but later recanted his story, saying he was coerced into confessing the crime. He said that he had been threatened to be released to the hands of an angry mob if he did not confess. The location of the hanging was supposed to be inside a barn close to Denton Jail with no public audience, but it was moved to an outside slope behind Caroline County Jail when rumors surfaced about a mob threatening to burn down the barn right before the hanging if they couldn't watch. Now, hundreds of people attended the hanging and watched from the ground, boats on the river, and some even hung from trees to watch. The event was even memorialized on 2 commemorative postcards entitled The Hanging of Wish Sheppard. The tale of the hanging says that Wish Sheppard resisted his walk to the gallows by gripping the cell bars with one hand and the other flat against the cell wall. The guards had to pry him out of the jail cell and march him to the gallows. Legend says the handprint remains on the cell wall, and many attempts have been made to cover it with paint and even plaster, but it always resurfaced. Strange things have also been reported by prisoners and guards over the years, which has been attributed to Wish Sheppard. Many prisoners would wake the sheriff early in the morning scared, saying that they saw the ghost of Wish Sheppard and heard footsteps. Some reported hearing chains clanking or a glimpse of a shadow figure walking by. One prisoner even claimed that Shepard came into his cell and attacked him, even though the cell door had been locked all evening and there was no one else in the cell. The prisoner did have scratches all over his arms and face, and Wish Sheppard's cell was never used because it's hard to open. The jail was remodeled in the early 1980s, and during the renovations, a wall was erected over the one with the handprint. This seemed to stop whatever had been tormenting the prisoners, but it was redirected towards the staff and guards. Many of the workers reported seeing a figure of a man in the security camera, and when they would investigate, there would be nobody there. Others say that the elevator operates by itself late at night with nobody riding it. Footsteps are heard in the halls and lights go off mysteriously. Most people who still work there are used to it now and just say to themselves, "It's just Wish Sheppard checking things out." The murder of Sallie Dean, Harmony, Maryland, Caroline County. 13-year-old Sallie Dean didn't make it to school on March 26, 1895. She was attacked on her way by someone she knew, and her body was found by her father in a wooded area. Little Sallie's throat had been cut. The brutal murder happened near a small village known as Harmony, which is just south of Denton in Maryland, in Caroline County. At first, the local authorities couldn't figure out who the murderer was, and with the townspeople getting more and more antsy, Baltimore detectives were brought in. The new detectives quickly took into custody a local blacksmith named Marshall Price, a 23-year-old man who lived close by the area that Sallie walked on her way to school. At first, Marshall Price denied his guilt, but while in custody, he changed his story, admitting to the crime. But he also said that his neighbor, Grant Corcoran, was also involved and the mastermind of the whole thing. During his confession, Marshall Price even defiled the victim by saying she was an unchaste girl. Eventually, he was convicted and sentenced to death by hanging, and Grant Corcoran was cleared of all charges. Marshall Price appealed the charges and changed his story several times while in custody, finally giving everyone what they wanted, a true confession. He thought if he came clean with the facts, and the judge would be lenient on him, granting him a reprieve. The confession reported in the Denton Journal is as follows. "I want to tell you something. The detective said that Sallie's throat was cut by a left-handed man. I want to say that this is the hand that cut her. When I came out of the woods after cutting materials for the frames, I crossed the road about 10 feet behind Sallie, who was on her way to school. She spoke to me pleasantly and remarked it was a lovely day. I joined her and walked a short distance, conversing on matters of no importance. A sudden impulse took possession of me. Without warning, I raised the axe which I carried in my hand and struck her on the side of the head. She fell to the ground, partially stunned. I dragged her to the side of the road and cut her underclothing, then tore her clothes with my hands. She revived around this time and said, "Oh, my head, how it hurts." And then I caught hold of both her hands and dragged her to the woods, cut her throat, but I did not violate her person. I covered her body with a cedar bush and buried her dinner bucket and knife with which I used to cut her throat. I was alone. Grant Corcoran had nothing to do with the murder. After the body was found, I took an active part in the search for the murderer, thinking I could in that way divert suspicion from myself. The detectives were too smart for me, though. When I got to Baltimore, I decided to confess to the U.S. Marshal, implicating Grant Corcoran, partly for revenge because Grant got a better trade, and partly because the people of Caroline County would lynch me if they thought I alone committed the murder. About a month after the confession, the governor of Maryland granted a reprieve to Price due to legal technicality, which angered the locals. Price and the jailer knew a mob was coming for him and that the minimum security jail was no match. Price pleaded to his jailer to set him free, promising he would only hide, but they refused him. The mob came for Price as he cowered in the corner of his cell. The mob placed a rope around his neck, beat him, and finally hung him from a tree behind the courthouse. Marshal Price is buried in the Denton Cemetery in a section that was not used at the time. His grave faces east-west with his head towards the east so that when he arises on Judgment Day, his back will be to his Maker. All the men who were directly involved in the lynching are said to have died a horrible death, all within 5 years of Price. One man is said to have burned to death, one drowned, another struck by lightning. It is also said that the tree Marshal Price was hanged from died shortly after, and the tree which was beside his grave also died within a year of his burial. Legend also says that Marshal Price comes back at night to dance on his grave on a moonlit night. Reports have also been made that the owners of the Dean home experienced strange, unexplainable things. There is a large stain on the wooden floor in the living room, which is believed to be caused by Sallie's blood when she was brought home and kept there for several days after the murder. When the owners installed new carpet, a sheet of 3/4-inch plywood subflooring was placed over the stain before the carpet was laid. When later the carpet was removed, the stain was found to be on the subflooring as if the blood soaked through. There have also been reports of a shadow figure seen in the wooded area where young Sallie lost her life. Wilson's Chance and Annie Belle Carter, Denton, Maryland, Caroline County. A patent for Wilson's Chance was issued for 22 acres in 1732 where Denton, Maryland is today. A Quaker named John Wilson built a home about 1750. Local history says that the home was used as a meeting place for the early Caroline County Quakers. Before the Civil War, a colonel named Richard Carter bought Wilson's Chance. Colonel Carter was an influential man in the region. Not only was he a commander of the local state militia, but also advisor to President Polk. Local oral history handed down says that Colonel Carter's 17-year-old daughter, Annie Belle Carter, returned home in July of 1882. She was studying art in England and the Netherlands. On July 26, 1882, Annie woke up feeling sick and walked to the second-floor porch for some fresh air. As she leaned against the rail, she fainted and fell over. Earlier that day, a tree had been cut down, and Annie fell on the tree roots, and it pierced her body. She died from those injuries a few days later. Another story that is similar to what happened to Annie is with the Cade family, who were tenant farming Wilson's Chance before the Carters bought it. This version states that Mr. Carter arranged for his daughter to be married to a man she didn't love, and the wedding was to take place at Wilson's Chance. The young bride went to her father and told him that she could not marry someone she didn't love. Her father became very angry and demanded that she not disobey him and to get herself ready for the wedding. The young bride then went upstairs to her room, very depressed over marrying against her will. She went to the second-floor balcony and threw herself off, committing suicide. Since then, there have been sightings of a young lady in white standing on the balcony, as well as sightings of her dancing in the front yard of Wilson's Chance. Most of these sightings were from African American religious revivals that were held in a building across the road. Those who attended the revivals would sing and play music, and that's when they would notice the lady in white dancing on the lawn. Apparitions of a woman in white have also been seen in the house, in the same room that opens up to the same balcony. Annie Belle Carter is buried in the Denton Cemetery and is the other grave that does not face north and south like the rest of them. Her grave faces east and west, with her feet facing the east. Her father was on the committee for the cemetery and requested this so that his daughter will face her maker on Resurrection Day. Athol's Ghost, Henderson, Maryland, Caroline County. A man from Somerset County, Maryland, named Richardson bought 600 acres in 1753. The land is in Caroline County, Maryland, and he named it Athol, which is now known today as Henderson, Maryland. William Jones built a brick house sometime in the late 1700s or early 1800s. The house has 2 protruding chimney stacks, one on each of the gabled walls. Today, the house sits in the middle of 255 acres of farmland. The person who owns the house today has a master's in historic preservation and has taken great care in restoring the home to its original. When the owner researched the history of the house, he found that in 1838, owners still showed the estate had 14 slaves valued at $200 each, but that there was one slave, Rachel, born about 1783, that only had a value of $1. He believes that she was the slave that lived in the house close to the family. There are some architectural indications that someone lived in both the attic and the basement. The current owner also believes that she is the only one valued at $1 because she was part of the family and they didn't want her sold. The current owner's real estate agent also disclosed that 2 little girls died in the 1880s at the residence of typhoid fever. They were buried in unmarked graves in the front yard. Some unexplainable events have taken place in the home. Once, in the middle of the night, the owner's young son awoke to the sound of a dog barking in the dining room, but they did not have a dog and the neighbors were a few miles away. Another time, the owner and his wife were talking in the same dining room with their son, now older, and their daughter-in-law. The sun was just starting to set, so it was still a little light out. Relaxed and enjoying each other's company, all 4 adults suddenly heard a child cry out, "Ma!" which seemed to come from the window area in the dining room. They investigated, but they did not find a child. A few years later, they were having a Christmas party and retold that story. The mother to the daughter-in-law heard the story and was shocked. She had been down to the house over the summer cutting grass when she took a break and went into the kitchen for a drink. While inside, she distinctly heard a child's voice saying, "Ma," but there were no children around. She also investigated inside and out and found nothing. Now, the owners loved their new home and continue to use it as a retreat. The unexplainable noises do not take away from its peacefulness. They say that it enhances it and gives it depth and a sense of history.